And hi, everybody. Good morning. It looks like everyone is entered into this room. I'm checking on the participants, the attendees' numbers, and they seem to have leveled off. My name is Robert Pelicciotti, and if you're here today, it's because you registered for the MCAS-Alt update. And just bear in mind, this update is for educators that are familiar with the MCAS-Alt. And administrators, it's not necessarily a complete training how to do the alt. It's just some important updates about how to complete a portfolio and some updates for important dates. And we'll have some questions answered today to you. Little housekeeping, just little introductions today. I want to welcome everyone. I'm joined here by Kevin Froten, who's the Cognia Senior Program Manager. And what Cognia does and what Kevin does is basically they really make sure we have all the tools and resources available for forms and graphs, help with logistics, help really organize materials like today's presentation. So a big thank you to them, and thank you, Kevin, for helping out today, for organizing this presentation. We have also in the wings Laura Hines and Sheila Chamberlain. They'll also be answering some questions. And I mentioned earlier that my name is Robert Pelicciotti. I currently work as the manager of inclusive assessment. As many of you know, that our esteemed and wonderful colleague Deb Hand retired last spring. Over the summer, she'll be providing some support to us, but in the meantime, I'm just going to be answering the questions until someone starts on this role of the coordinator for the MCAS-Alt. So thank you, everyone, for taking time this morning away from your schedule. I really appreciate it. I'll be brief, and I want to make sure I provide good information to you that addresses all the important issues and reminders and dates this year. When we start a meeting here, we really want to make sure at DESE that we always go back to our educational vision. You know, what are we doing? Making sure everything is grounded in that educational vision. And there's three pillars of our vision. One, that we know all students are valued. We want to make sure we think about that in our work. We want to make sure that our experiences are real world, interactive, and guided up academic foundations, curriculum foundations. And we want to figure out how can we enable individualized supports? How can we make sure students can excel we want at grade level, but how can we excel to get there? Fundamentally, the students we're working with, if they're taking an altered assessment, it's because they're working at altered achievement standards and they're substantially below grade level, but we want to help get them there. A little housekeeping, little logistics for everyone today. Kevin, thank you so much. If you see open the PowerPoint, Kevin put an update, a PDF or slides, everyone in the chat. So if everyone has questions about the presentation slides, you can download them. They're available in the chat. The Q&A is, the chat's disabled for you, so you can't write questions in the chat, but you can get information. Please use the Q&A to ask questions. We will stop at the end of the session and go through some of the questions aloud. We may answer some questions during the presentation, but if you want, I would really appreciate you hold most of your questions to the end, and at that time, we can go through them. As always, we tend to have this blanket statement. If you have a question about, I have a student who, kind of specific questions related to the individual needs of a student, that would best be addressed in a one-on-one conversation. Please email mcas@mass.gov. We can provide you some support. In addition to that, an important note is that we're recording these trainings, and it's going to be available for you on the DESE YouTube site in a few weeks. So thank you for that. And I want to make sure everyone's familiar with the basic logistics of today. Again, the chat is disabled for you. You ask questions in the Q&A, but you can use the chat to retrieve the slides, or that's the update slides will be for you. There's a couple topics I want to discuss for you this morning. One is just some important updates and reminders for the 2024-2025 school year. Let's look at these updates. What are the updates that we're talking about? Well, we're talking about trainings that we're having this year. What trainings are we having? We're having an introduction to the MCAS-Alt core concepts trainings. So that's basically the training of how to complete the assessment for the MCAS-Alt for educators who need a refresher and for those who are new. We always have, and we're going to have a specific training for English language arts for writing. So if you're looking to assess a student in writing, there's some additional training and specific support training for you. And there's a training for civics. As many of you are aware that for students in grade 8, all students have to complete a civics assessment and a civics project. And because of that, the students for an alternate assessment also have to complete some type of assessment task on that. And we're going to have specific training on the civics for grade 8 only this year. Students who are completing science in grades 5 and 8 in high school, there's some specific trainings for that too. And these are all available online. These are virtual trainings, and you can sign on to the trainings the same way you sign on to that. And Kevin, I want to thank you so much because Kevin dropped in the chat the training registration flyer. So looking at these trainings, if you see one that stands out to you, you haven't done MCAS-Alt in a while, you want to learn more about civics, you want to register for that training here. Again, today's training, we're not going to go into the specific requirements of civics or science. We're just giving you some important general updates. And if you are an administrator or supervisor and you want to learn more about the MCAS-Alt from a supervisor's role, making sure you can support the educators completing that, we have some specific trainings for you, and that's on October 9th and October 22nd. Important dates, important things to remember. We always want to make sure everyone's aware of important dates. I've actually got a couple calls already about MCAS-Alt materials from new principals, educators. When are we getting those? So you cannot order any materials until January 2nd to the 17th. So nothing's going to be ordered to schools until the new year. Once they're orders, schools should expect to receive those materials around the week of February 24th. So that's when the MCAS-Alt binders would be arriving at schools. When they arrive at schools, it's really important that someone reminds the administrator who receives the shipment, whoever received the shipment, to go through, review the contents, see if additional materials are required at that time. So again, materials are ordered at the beginning of the school year, or beginning of the new year, I should say, January 2nd through the 17th. Schools receive those around the week of February 24th to review them, open the materials, and see if new materials are required. And remember, these binders must be shipped back, picked up by UPS by Friday, March 25th, or March 28th, I should say. That's when they were due. So again, Friday, March 28th, that's when they're going to be due. And preliminary results that will be provided before final results are posted around mid-June to schools, so schools can see what the preliminary results for submitting those MCAS-Alt portfolios. You heard me mention civics. There's a few important updates this year. What are some important things that as an educator you should realize for the MCAS-Alt? One, civics is only in grade 8. Again, if you're working with a student in grade 8, there's a small civics requirement, and we really wanted to make sure we understood that educators in grade 8 have other tasks to do relating to alternate assessment for science. And we kept that in mind to try to make sure the civics requirements are as approachable and real world as possible, and how to make sure that they're participating as required, collecting meaningful information, but at an appropriate level in a way that will not overwhelm educators. So we really wanted to keep that in mind. And again, we're going to have a specific training on those requirements. We're not going to really delve in that today because that requires a very focused training just to make sure everyone's on the same page. Alternate assessment participation criteria. As we know, last year we opened the new definition or put forth the new definition. Only students that meet the definition for a student with the most significant cognitive disabilities should be eligible to participate in the MCAS-Alt. Students that do not meet that criteria should not be scheduled for an MCAS-Alt. If you use this link here, you'll see the definition for the criteria for students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. And what we used to have is a participation tool that schools completed last year, and they uploaded that into the security portal. That is not required to be uploaded this year. It's still a required document, but it's a required document to be maintained by schools. So if you click on this link, you'll see the alternate assessment participation tool. This is not something you have to fill out annually, but you would fill it out once and you'd review it every 3 years when you would complete a reevaluation, when you'd have that new assessment data to look at the student, seeing if they still are functioning at that level that would meet the eligibility for a student with the most significant cognitive disabilities. Please know that if a student has skills close to the grade level, they should be taking the MCAS assessment in all areas. What are some important information and some important tasks? Excuse me. Please know that if you or your principal filed an appeal, an MCAS appeal, these results were mailed back to school in this July. And so if you haven't received the results of your appeal, you want to check with your administrator, whoever's handling them, that the mail there, because they were returned. We always say that students are assessed each year. So when you go in forms and graphs and you create a profile and you collect information for a student, all the information is purged at the end of the school year after the assessment. If you're an educator that completed MCAS-Alt last year, you must go into forms and graphs this year to create your account and start entering information for your students. Again, you must create a new account annually each year in forms and graphs. Really important to know is that when you're in mathematics, there are some required domains, as you'll see listed in the resource guides or alternate academic achievement standards. Forms and graphs allow you as educator to spiral back through entry points to access skills for things that are for tasks that your student can do, the most challenging tasks that you feel attainable for your student. And that's built into forms and graphs, that spiraling back tool. We have updated materials, educators' materials for the MCAS-Alt, and we also have some updated resource guides, which are called our alternate academic achievement standards. These have updated entry points and access skills. We always remind educators working on science to begin collecting evidence earlier in the year. You don't have to complete a whole unit, but it's usually good to start with the unit. So sometimes we'll take a little longer, depending on looking for a unit for your student that's completing a science domain. What are some steps and some strategies to accurately administer the MCAS-Alt? Now, these are steps and strategies Deb Hand really talked to me about to make sure that we provide information to educators. And I've heard from educators these steps that really help them to make sure they have a complete portfolio that's accurate. What do? One, they really use this checking for completeness form. This is handed out at portfolios in progress. In this winter, this spring will be handed out for educators working on completing a portfolio. It's also available in forms and graphs. And what it is, as well as educators who are working on a specific domain, say you're working on a domain in ELA or math or science, and you go through a series of questions to make sure you have your data chart has those correct dates, making sure your dates align to school days, making sure you start with accuracy and independence that are at a level. They're not both above 80% when you start with an entry point or access skill. Really important questions, helps you assure your portfolio is accurate and complete. We have for you a list of available resources. In forms and graphs, it's really important to use the available resources. There's a mathematics glossary. This glossary is used to help educators, who may be working with a student in a different curriculum, grade level curriculum. Maybe you're working in a grade 5 curriculum. You're unfamiliar with some of the terms they're using in this glossary. Should help you look at these terms and figure out what would be some good entry points based on these terms, help understand how to, provide a challenging entry point or access skill for these students. We also really wanted to make sure that educators we put a lot of effort into high quality science instructional materials, making sure this is available online for educators and resources who are working on science that really match the entry point and access skills that our students are working on. So we really want to make sure that those high quality instruction materials are available to you as educators. Please note that the National Center for Accessible Education Materials, the Learning Center at CAST, provides technical assistance. They also have coaching, resources to increase availability, and they have accessible educational materials, including texts. And they really have a variety of resources for educators who are working on these portfolios. We strongly recommend you look at those, as well as the high quality materials we have available in forms and graphs. Really helpful to educators. What are some suggestions for completing a science, technology, engineering domain, a portfolio for a student who's working in that particular area in grade 5 and 8 in high school? So you may have realized that a variety of portfolios last year in science, there was a significant increase in the number of what we would call incompletes or missing. And mostly that was due, or 99% that was due because educators, a lot of educators who submitted those portfolios had evidence that did not match. Their evidence did not match the entry point or required practice. So what do I mean by that? Well, an educator often shows entry point that required a model and the work sample they submitted. There was not a model involved. It was simple matching, or it was a fill in the blank. There was not a model. So if the practice requires a model, really making sure that you're understanding how to incorporate that model in the student's learning. They're building that model. Really important. Let's go through some of the steps, some suggestions for science. Really important to think about working on a complete unit. That's very important. And you don't have to finish the unit, but really making sure you start with a complete unit and see what materials a student can do within that unit. Remember, making sure to review the student's evidence, make sure it's aligned to the entry point. If science is an area that's new to you, if you haven't done it before for a particular student, make sure you're collaborating with the science content specialist in your school, looking at those resources and forms of graphs for those high quality learning units, curriculum units. And it's really important to attend these in-person and the virtual trainings that we have. We call portfolios in progress in the winter and spring. Building on that, I mentioned earlier, what are some high quality topics that are linked to some units? In forms and graphs, kind of we're breaking this down by core idea, some important topics, natural resources, renewable and non-renewable energy resources, examples of ways humans reduce their impacts on Earth's resources and environment, example, composting, recycling, preparations for severe weather, climate change, and severe weather impact. These are some important topics. These can be linked to some of these high quality educator units, science units that we have in forms and graphs. If you use these links, you can see these, they'll take you to these high quality units for solid start, ever changing environments, for engineering of toys, there's storylines that relate to obviously kind of examples of reducing waste. Where does clean water come from? And where does it go after we make it dirty? Open science, earth resources. These are really high quality units that you could use for some of your students. Here's an important reminder for educators completing portfolios for the ELA domain. So we know that writing is a required component. It's a required component, and with the writing samples that are submitted, the final product, the educator has to pre-score the rubric. This worksheet is available in forms and graphs. Important as an educator, when you're doing this, you pre-score the rubric, and you can see this, there's a final work sample, and this educator selected 3 for level of complexity, 3 for expression of ideas and content, 2 for knowledge of conventions, text structure, and use of vocabulary. And they were for 5 for independence, or 4 for independence, I should say. Again, these are done for the final work sample. It's a pre-scored rubric, and the people that are reviewing these are scoring specialists reviewing portfolios would take this pre-scoring rubric, it's important, and they evaluate the student's work on that rubric. They're always going to accept this unless something is amiss with the pre-scoring rubric. It's vastly off from the student's particular final work sample. Say, for example, students doing access skills, and the pre-scoring rubric is marked 4 for every particular section. That would be a particular bit of a concern, and we'd have to take a look. The scores, we'd have to take a look at this very closely. Again, this is built into forms and graphs, and it's required for the final work samples. Here's a really important topic. Sometimes we want to make sure we're supporting the evidence with how the student got there. You can include this, it's not required, but you can include information and the evidence of how the student got to the particular final product or final work product evidence. So here would be some supporting information for ELA writing. The student used this iPad writing program, and this is how they use the vocabulary to come to their final writing production. Again, provide supporting documentation is always important in a portfolio, helps us understand what went in the classroom. Again, it's not required, but it's a good piece of information to include when the portfolio is submitted. I mentioned earlier that forms and graphs, when you use forms and graphs online, this allows you to spiral back. It automatically spirals back to the most challenging entry point. We really recommend that you complete this mathematics skills survey for your student. It helps you select the most challenging entry point, and then you could start there, and you could spiral back in forms and graphs to the one that would be most challenging in that domain. I look, for example, at expressions and equations. We want to start the most challenging one in grade 8. If the student can't do that, it would spiral back automatically to operations and algebraic thinking, going back to grade 5, 4, 3, and so on in kindergarten. That would be how those domains line up. Again, this is a visual for you to help you understand how forms and graphs spirals back for you. I mentioned today that I would be brief, kind of just get to the high level points, provide some information about what's important, some due dates, what's new this year, things to pay attention to. I don't have any other specific information for you today, but I wanted to reserve this time period at the end to answer any burning questions you may have, how it can provide you some support. I got a question here from Ashley. Ashley asks, will the school principals need to upload any documents, including student lists of student completed ALT, or they'll we need to the school need to be maintained? Ashley, I'm not sure what you mean by that. Last year we had the participation tool being uploaded into the security portal. That is no longer required. The participation tool for students that are eligible has to be maintained by the school, and it's a documented form that program monitoring will look for when they review IEPs for students. Again, it's a good practice. It's also a form to be looking for, but we're not requiring schools to upload that particular participation tool. Alicia asked a question along the same lines. Thank you, Alicia. The participation tool only needs to be updated when 3-year evaluations are done. Yeah, that's correct. That would be the most logical time because you would have new evaluation information regarding the student's academic and adaptive behavior and functional skills. So as I mentioned earlier, and we'll have another training on it for eligibility for students. Students have to meet the criteria to be eligible for the alternate assessment. And the criteria has 4 pieces, but the only thing that is really substantially new is they have to have a documented evidence that the student is functioning at least 2 standard deviations below the mean on cognitive and adaptive behaviors, and adaptive behaviors can be daily living skills. And that has to be evaluation every 3 years. So it's always good to have those adaptive behavior assessments. Catherine asks, if I have an 11th grade student that has completed and achieved either progressing awareness or merging on the ELA math areas, but has not achieved science, should they continue to take the science? Correct. Catherine, thanks so much for the question. This is a participation question that I think would apply to anyone. It's not about even achieving progressing or awareness. All students are required to participate in high school at least once in science by grade 10 and in grade 10 ELA and math. Once they do that, they are no longer required to participate in the alternate assessment. No longer require any assessment. Same thing for students taking the standard MCAS test. You certainly could continue to collect evidence and submit a portfolio, but there's not required to do so. Only students are required to participate in high school. There is a once requirement for each domain by grade 10, science, math, and ELA. Alyssa asked, can you please clarify the alternate system participation tool only needs to be done at reevaluations, correct, annually? That's correct, Alyssa. There would be no reason to do that annually. That should be done every 3 years. That's when you would have new information. Generally, that's when every 3 years, they're required to evaluate a student and look at their particular functioning, determine whether they're still eligible, and collect that information. And that's when you would update that tool because you would have new information on that. Are we including that document in our portfolios? Two standard deviations below behind adaptive behavior, or just for our records? You would include that just for your records in the participation tool. You would not submit that within the portfolio. Again, that's a tool that participation tool is used and kept with the IEP documents, like other N1s of proposed actions. If there was let's say, for example, you had an amendment, all that information you would keep that within the same file. Kristen asks, where can I find the login information to the online portal? Is this listed in DESI somewhere site? I think it was through Cognia. Thanks so much, Kristen. So forms and graphs would be available when you look through the website and the slides, but I bet Kevin could drop the link in the chat too. So if you look at the chat, I bet it'll be dropped in the link for you shortly. Jennifer asks, are there any changes in requirements submissions for 7th grade ELA or math? No, Jennifer, there are not any changes in the requirements. Jen asked, will in-person binders review return? They were very helpful. I think, Jen, you're asking about portfolios in progress, and those meetings will occur in winter. So if you're working on collecting information, we have in-person reviews, and they're this winter and spring. The dates are not currently publicized, but we're going to have an update in the next month, probably around November. And in November, we're going to give information where you can register for portfolios in progress and portfolio review sessions where you can bring your portfolio that you're working on, and we can have a little Q&A session. Also gives you time to work on those portfolios. So thank you very much for asking that question, Jen. Georgia asked, if a student took an MCAS in grade 10, can you switch them to the ALT? Good question, Georgia. You can always change the designation for a student at any time for an alternate assessment to a standard MCAS and vice versa, because the student's needs can always change. So yes, you could change the assignment for a student, and the IEP can make the determination of what they should be participating in. David asked, I just want to make sure I heard correctly. Did you say 2 standard deviations in both cognitive and achievement testing? I said cognitive and adaptive behavior assessments, David. And the information is provided on the definition. It's listed in the educator's manual and is listed in the accessibility manual on our website. If you look through online on these slides that were put in the chat, it'll take you to the criteria for students who are considered identified as students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. Thank you for that question, David. I appreciate it. Mary asked, could you please repeat what you had said about students not having to complete the MCAS-Alt again? There was a glitch on my end, and I missed what you said. Thanks, Mary. I said that students who fulfilled the participation requirements in high school, they participated once in science by grade 10. In grade 10, they completed their ELA in math. They are not required to take the assessment after grade 10, just like any other student. There's one participation requirement. They have to participate once for accountability in high school. After they meet that requirement, just like any other student, they're not required to continue to take the assessment. They certainly can, but they're not required to. I think I answered these questions. If a student did the ALT, can you switch into the test? Yes, Georgia, you can switch every year. And the same question about after grade 10. So a lot of participation questions for high school. Again, the participation requirements for high school is the same participation requirements for all students. Just because they're taking the ALT doesn't mean their participation requirements are different. You only participate after grade 10 if you're looking to collect more information for how to help the student graduate. So there was a lot of questions. We had 21 questions. I really appreciate everyone taking time out of their busy schedule to attend this meeting. I know that the start of the school year is always hectic. Got to get the classes set up, working with students, trying to figure out every student's needs, making sure you're planning the school day, working in the IEP, providing a really good education program for the student. And I thank you that for taking time out of your day to attend a training on the MCAS-Alt. It's really helpful that we have this little venue to provide some important information. I know that not everyone likes to read all the information in the manual, and we'll be having more trainings throughout the year. I would like to break it up so not taking too much of your time at one section. That's why later on we're going to have the specific trainings for ELA writing, civics, and science. That's why we're breaking that up, and we're having other trainings. But I really appreciate your time on this rainy Monday morning. I hope the rain won't put anyone down or put anyone in a bad mood. It's Monday. We'll make the most of it. And I really thank you. At this end of this training, this last slide you'll see here on your screen, there's information on how to contact us and how to contact Cognia for support with forms and graphs. That number is 866-834-8880, or the email for assistance with forms and graphs, ordering materials mostly. But if you have a question in policy, I have a student who, that's where you go to the MCAS-Alt website. One question wanted to ask, it was just there's answer to her already. So if you have more questions, I'll be here. Otherwise, feel free to return to your activities, maybe get a cup of coffee as you mosey back to the classroom, provide some support for the student, for your students. Caitlin Fitzgerald asked a question of participation tool. Do the adaptive scales need to be 2 or more standard deviations in all the domain? So let's look at the definition here. Let me go back to the slides here. Let's see if I can pull it up. So a lot of question about the eligibility criteria, and I'm just going to read it to everyone who's currently on here. What does the definition say? So part 4 of the definition says the student has to be performing significantly below average in general cognitive functioning and adaptive behavior. This is defined as a student functioning 2 or more standard deviations below the mean in both cognitive functioning and adaptive behavior. 2 or more adaptive skills, just 2 or more adaptive skills, such as daily living skills and communication, self-care, social skills, and academic skills have to be. So 2 or more have to be below 2 standard deviations below the mean of adaptive behavior. And there's a variety of ways educators can go out, get tools, school psychologists can evaluate students on that domain. Again, this requirement, this definition was required by federal law, and also something the department worked with interest groups and looked at other states. It's not, it is very common to use these type of terms, and like I would say, universally all states use some type of definition that include these scores in adaptive behavior because it's required by federal law and cognitive functioning for an evaluation to determine eligible for an alternate assessment. Marie Brinken said, I have a student who is a multilingual learner and will be completing an MCAS-Alt testing. Would they be completing the MCAS-Alt as well? Marie, good question. One would imagine it would make sense because if you meet the eligibility criteria for an alternate assessment, that alternate assessment criteria is the same criteria for the MCAS-Alt assessment. They should not assign a student to the MCAS-Alt unless they meet the same alternate assessment criteria, which is the eligibility criteria for the most significant cognitive disabilities. Any more questions trickling in? I don't see many more. Ooh. Elizabeth asked, really good question. Thanks, Elizabeth. I have a student who does not meet all criteria for MCAS-Alt eligibility. Is it too late to switch them to a regular MCAS? No, it is not too late. The team, you can switch at any time during the school year when new information arrives. So this is a good example of the student is not eligible. The team would look at that and they would update the IEP. And you don't even necessarily even have like a big formal team meeting. You could just do this through a proposed action, looking at the information. You let the parent know, and you would do an N1. You would amend the IEP, and there would be scheduled to take the standard test with accommodations. And keep in mind, there's a variety of special access accommodations the student might be able to take advantage of to approach assessment. And we know that some of the questions on the standard assessment are going to be very, very challenging for students. That's perfectly acceptable and understandable. And what we would really emphasize is, try to make it as less anxiety producing as possible. Give the student opportunities to try some of the questions. If they cannot participate or cannot move forward, just say it's okay. Move them to an area, the academic classroom, where they can do other activities. They don't have to sit there in front of the computer screen, or they should not sit there in front of a computer screen for a long period of time without making progress. Wanted to ask a participation question. Some of you have a lot of these questions about what if the student never attended school this year? What exactly do I have to submit? And I think she meant submit, not summit. Wanda, just like any other student, all students are required to participate in the alternate assessment. So the school needs to do their best. There's still some students do not attend school. Some students are assessed at a remote location, taking the standard MCAS. This student could be assessed in another location. So just do the best you can. It's not necessarily your responsibility so much as the principal's responsibility to make sure you work with them to do your best to collect the assessment and administer it. Caitlin asked a similar question. If the student meets criteria for the MCAS-Alt, but is regular MCAS on their IEP, can the amendment be complete or be a full team meeting? That's kind of just a practice at your school, Caitlin. It really depends on the understanding of that. It's not like you're changing educational placement. You're just updating the IEP to reflect new information. So there are a lot of ways to do that. I would talk with your special education director. Oftentimes, parents or liaison who talk with the parents, say this is what we're going to do. They have a proposed action and there's some type of agreement. You could send an email saying this is what we're agreeing to. Consent for an IEP, any consent means something in writing. If that's delivered in email, that would be considered in writing too. But again, I would check with your special education director how you want to proceed with that. And let's see more questions coming in. I really do appreciate the questions. It's oftentimes some of the questions we have could be questions other people have. And so we can kind of provide that information to everyone out there who's attending. I really thank you for taking time out of your busy day. If there's no more questions, we're going to end this, probably close this in a few minutes. I'll let Kevin take care of that. And again, thank you, Laura. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Sheila, for answering the question and providing support. It's really helpful. Well, thanks so much, everybody. I hope you have a great rest of your day.